What's up, guys? Brady Figueroa coming at you with a review for the new Drudkh album Shadowplay, released 2 weeks ago now, Friday, March 21st. I guess one good thing about these last couple weeks being so busy with new music is that it's giving me kind of a reason and somewhat of an excuse to delay on certain reviews so I can spend more time with the album. And not only is underground music the easiest music to do this with because it reaches more of a specific audience and doesn't really benefit as much from time uploaded after the release, which is the case for a lot of more mainstream metal and rock bands that I would talk about. But I think for the sake of the review, the music itself also really benefits from just more time spent with it, because a lot of these albums are either really nuanced and require a bit more of attention paid to them and time to really digest them, but they could also be more passive and albums that you kind of retain more from when it's kind of just playing in the background and being the overall soundtrack to your day or whatever you're doing. This album, though, which is also the 13th album from this Ukrainian black metal band, is very much the latter. It's very much a passive listen. I've also been excited to review this album because of all the black metal albums I've done on this channel, this is actually the first time I'm reviewing an album from a black metal band who I'm already familiar with, at least to some extent. I haven't fully dove into their back catalog just because that's a really dense back catalog for reasons I'll get into in this review, actually. But I will say their last two albums I've enjoyed. That being 2018's They Often See Dreams About the Spring, which is a translation from Ukrainian, and 2022's All Belong to the Night. And both of those albums, I think the reason why I enjoyed them so much is because they did just set these really intense but clear and vivid soundscapes and kind of backdrops. And this album does exactly that yet again. Like the labyrinth-like long song structures, the overall notion that several of these songs, or maybe even the entire album, could maybe be listened to like one entire composition. And just overall a huge emphasis on mood, aural space, sonic imagery like I was talking about. So it's obviously springtime right now, and in my neck of the woods that tends to bring a lot of rain and just overall gloominess and cloudiness, and today was like the perfect day for that. It was just super dark and gray and cloudy like all day, as you can see. So of course I had this album playing literally all day at work, on my commutes to and from work. And also as it's starting to warm up, I'm trying to get outside more. So right after work, I actually just went for a walk in the woods. And I just had this album blasting in my headphones for like the entire, I think, hour and a half I was there. So, and especially being in that setting, like I felt like I was in the exact sonic landscape that this album shoots for. It's obviously a really dark album, as black metal typically is. I find, though, that with this album, this darkness isn't really going for specific, clear-cut emotions and moods in the tracks, and rather it just feels like a ton of different emotions in this giant whirlpool just clustering up. And that element really is present throughout the entire record. Like, I don't think, there aren't really many specific parts that I get clear-cut emotions from. It's just this overwhelming sense of darkness. That being said, this album has essentially kind of two different settings to it, which both work really well to the point where it never really gets repetitive or tiring. The first being mostly the parts with vocals over them that do kind of like meander a little bit structure-wise. Just the parts that maybe are a little bit more flat dynamics-wise. But I don't mean that in a bad way, because the other setting this album has is just these explosions and walls of pure emotion and these layers and layers of sound. That dynamic makes it so the songs feel like they're taking almost these slow, deep breaths, or like there's just this emotion that's bottled up, and then when those huge parts hit, it's like it all gets let out. Take the first full-length track on here, track 2, April, as a great instance of that, which is also probably my favorite track on here. This song, for like the first 2/3, is your pretty straightforward atmospheric black metal as far as sound. Vocals come in and out. There's those kind of two parts where one of them's a bit more just standard double bass and like a halftime groove. And then there's that kind of ascending, I don't know if I want to call it like a bridge or a pre-chorus. The song doesn't have much actual structure to it, But that part with those more like frantic sounding drums, I may get carried away in describing certain parts of songs sometimes. But my point here is that the song, given that structure, it feels like it is really building up. And like I said, there's this kind of bottle of emotion that's about to burst. And then right at the 740 mark of this song, this gloom-inducing, dismal chord progression creeps in with these like really atmospheric and spacious, clean guitars just kind of ominously chiming through it. That part is just sick. And opposed to the majority of the song that kind of drags on a little bit and really is carried out for a while, this part doesn't really appear for too long. We only hear it for a minute, which I realize in most music, a minute is a long time to use on one chord progression. But in the context of this song, it feels really short. Luckily, though, it does come back to close the song. The next track, the Exile, does this really well also. For me, the emotional apex chord progression, as I'll call it, in this song kicks in right at like the 5 minutes and 12 second mark. But notice how like maybe after the first minute of the song, it sonically and stylistically does really feel like it is building up and like kind of ascending to this, I guess, emotional apex, like I just said. Track 4, the Fallen Blossom, has this chord progression that kicks in at like the 3:18, give or take mark, that does kind of, maybe the song doesn't have as much of an emotional climax as the other ones do, but while this one stays steady the whole time, it still has parts like that where you can hear those kind of distant picked guitars, adding just that little extra element of texture to it. But even despite this song maybe being a little less dynamic than the other songs on here, it still really does hit you and still provide you with that same backdrop that the album has established so far. And if anything, it maybe gives the album somewhat of a chance to breathe a little bit. While the other two songs I just mentioned like do have those strong emotional moments, if you're listening to this album more for just like background noise, like I kind of talked about earlier, which is what I do, that's how I most enjoy music like this, this song kind of serves best in that role and doesn't really try to bring you in as much as those songs do. Doing reviews like this are so interesting because this is just so different from how I would talk about like a mainstream metal band or even a band like Arch Enemy, who I just talked about. Just any album that's like supposed to keep you engaged in it. This is really the only style of metal I feel like I talk about, or music, where like it's okay if it doesn't fully keep you like locked onto it the whole time. This song, it's especially okay because the next track, The Eve, is one of the most emotionally intense songs on the album, and one that really does kind of stay in somewhat of a precipice between the laid back vibe and the emotional like magnitude of the first two tracks I mentioned. It kind of stays in between that the entire time, and it's driven home by these synthesizers in the last like 2.5 minutes of the song that almost sounds like a distant, like dissonant ringing. It almost sounds like your ears are ringing, which, I mean, nobody wants to listen to that, right? But it works in this song. I don't know how. I think it just is right on that border between where it becomes an actual ringing, but it gives that part so much more character, and it makes that part really unique and makes it stand out a lot. With the closing track, The Thirst, I mean, the last like third of the song, which has got to be like at least 4.5 minutes, again, has these synthesizers that are almost kind of chiming and appearing like distantly in the background of the song. They almost sound like they don't belong, but in like the most amazing way, because they add just this somewhat out of place but really cool sounding brightness to the song. And then that brightness is contrasted by these like really haunting, echoey backing vocals, almost choir-like vocals, which ends up having almost like this push and pull dynamic between the brightness and the darkness. And I especially love how they gave this section like the last 5 minutes to just get really ingrained in your head. That song also has some cool like acoustic breaks throughout it. This was a great song to actually end the album on. And overall, this is an album that meets its goals magnificently. Even the intro track, Scattering the Ashes, is great. Like first of all, there's the actual like digging sounding noises that may actually be scattering ashes. And then despite this song being an instrumental, it just has some really great melodies in it. And it's a great way to actually set up the album, and it does that perfectly. And it's funny because like for most mainstream-esque albums, or really any non-underground metal album, I'm usually very critical about songs like this. Because to me, they oftentimes just feel like space fillers, or there's not any interesting musical ideas in them. It's just kind of like producer generated. A lot of times they're just unnecessary as a whole. They oftentimes don't set up the mood of the album at all, or they go for a specific mood of the album, just doesn't maintain that. There's so many things that go wrong with tracks like that on the majority of albums I would review. But if they're done right on an album that could actually benefit from it, this song is a great example of when it can really work, which again just feeds into this album's, for me, main function, which is to just plain and simple serve as background music for dark, gloomy days like today. And I guess the only flip side to that would be I probably wouldn't recommend this album to anybody who's trying to get into black metal. Because if you try and listen to this song like you listen to most types of music, in a sense that you want something to kind of keep you coming back, something hooky, something a bit more like distinct and memorable, this album it doesn't shoot for that. So as a result, like, you'd probably find this album a bit tiring, a bit boring, and a bit hard to get into. But if you are one of those people who wants to kind of explore black metal, leave a comment below and I will recommend you some albums. And if that goes well, then definitely come back to this album. And then going off of that, if you are a black metal fan, I highly recommend this album. I can't recommend it enough, honestly. It is totally an album meant to be a passive listen, but it absolutely excels in that role. And for that reason, I'm going to score this album a 26 out of 30. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have heard this album, definitely comment below your thoughts on it. Remember to hit subscribe for more rock and metal related content. And I got my Instagram, Spotify, and Threads links in the description of the video. Until next time, thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys later. Peace.